Jakob Holstedt could not feel his hands anymore, could not feel his feet, could not feel anything except the bone-deep cold that had burrowed into his chest like something alive and hungry. And when his daughter Ingrid found him at dawn on January 13, 1888, lying face down in the snow less than a quarter-mile from their sod house, his lips were blue, and his skin was the color of frozen meat, and the only reason she knew he was still breathing was the thin wisp of vapor that rose from his mouth into the -40-degree air. He had been out there all night. The desperate father had saved a child who was not his own, and the West had turned against him for it. The cold had marked him. The blizzard had taken its price, and as Ingrid screamed for help that would not come for hours because the snow was still waist-deep, and the nearest neighbor was 2 miles away through drifts that had buried fences and swallowed landmarks, Jakob Holstedt lay dying in the white silence of the Dakota Territory winter, his body a frozen testament to a choice that no father should ever have to make, but that some fathers make anyway because the cold does not care about rules and children do not deserve to die alone. If you are drawn to stories of desperate choices made in impossible moments, of fathers who risk everything when the cold closes in and the West turns its back, then subscribe now, because what Jakob Holstedt did on the day of the children's blizzard will cut straight through to the bone of what it means to be a father when mercy costs everything. The morning of January 12, 1888, started warm. It was the kind of warm that made people in Dakota Territory forget that winter could kill without warning. The temperature had climbed above freezing by mid-morning. The sun was out, and children went to school without their heavy coats. Farmers worked outside in shirt sleeves. Jakob Holstedt, a 44-year-old Swedish immigrant who had staked his homestead claim 5 years earlier, stood in his small wheat field and felt something close to hope, because hope was a hard thing to hold when you were alone, except for an 8-year-old daughter and the memory of a wife who had died giving birth 2 years prior. Jakob was a quiet man, the kind of quiet that comes from learning English as a second language, and he was a careful man, the kind of careful that comes from losing 3 fingers on your left hand to frostbite in the winter of 1886 and 1887, when the blizzards had killed 90% of the cattle on the open range. He had learned that the West did not forgive mistakes. It did not forgive carelessness. And so even on this warm January morning, when his daughter Ingrid had walked the 1.5 miles to the one-room schoolhouse, Jakob had watched the sky with the wariness of a man who knew that warmth in January was a lie. The cold told before it came back to kill you. He saw the wall coming just after noon. It was a dark line on the northwestern horizon, thick and black and moving fast. Jakob knew immediately what it was. The temperature had already started to drop. The wind had shifted. And Jakob Holstedt did the only thing a man could do when he saw death coming for his child. He tied a rope from the door of his sod house to the door of his small barn, maybe 30 yards, so that if he had to go out into the whiteout, he would have a lifeline back. Then he went inside, and he waited, and he prayed that the teacher would keep the children in the schoolhouse until the storm passed, because 1.5 miles in a blizzard might as well be 100 miles, and children froze to death in Dakota Territory every winter. The blizzard hit like a freight train. One moment there was wind. The next, there was nothing but white, a wall of snow so thick that Jakob could not see the barn 30 yards away. Even with the rope stretched between the buildings, the temperature plummeted. 40 degrees, 30, 20 below. By 3 in the afternoon, it was 20 below zero and falling, and the wind howled at 50 miles per hour. And Jakob sat in his sod house with the fire built high and listened to the storm tear at the walls and knew that something had gone wrong. The teacher had not kept the children inside. He found them just after dark. He had put on every piece of clothing he owned, wrapped a scarf around his face until only his eyes showed, and gone out into the blizzard with nothing but the rope to guide him and a prayer that had no words, because desperation does not need language. He made it to the barn. He called Ingrid's name into the wind and heard nothing. He stood there in the whiteout, the cold already starting to work its way through the layers of wool and hide, and he was about to turn back when he heard it. A child crying, faint, close, maybe 10 feet away but invisible in the swirling white. Jakob let go of the rope. It was the kind of decision that killed men. Let go of the rope in a whiteout and you might never find it again. Let go of the rope and you might wander in circles until you froze. But a desperate father does not think about these things when he hears his child crying in the dark. He found Ingrid on her hands and knees in the snow, so cold she could barely speak. Her lips already blue, her fingers stiff inside mittens that were crusted with ice, and next to her, curled in a ball and shaking so hard his whole body convulsed, was another child, a boy, 7 years old. His name was Niels Andersen, and his family lived 2 miles to the south, and he had followed Ingrid because when the teacher dismissed the children in a panic as the blizzard swept in, Niels did not know the way to his own home, but he knew that Ingrid Holstedt lived somewhere to the north, and he had stumbled after her through the storm, and now here he was. And Jakob Holstedt looked at this child who was not his, this boy who belonged to a family 2 miles away through a blizzard that was killing people all across the territory. And he knew that the West had just turned every rule he had ever learned upside down. The rule in Dakota Territory, the unspoken law that every settler understood, was simple. In a blizzard, you save your own first. You do not risk your life for a neighbor's child when your own child needs you. You do not go back out into the cold for someone else's boy when staying inside means your daughter survives. It was not cruelty. It was survival. It was the bargain that the West demanded. The price of living in a place where winter was an enemy that gave no quarter and took no prisoners, and every man and woman on the northern plains knew it, lived by it, taught it to their children. But Jakob Holstedt, standing in the whiteout, with 2 frozen children at his feet, both of them barely conscious, both of them minutes from death, found that he could not follow that rule. He could not leave Niels Andersen to die. A desperate father might save his own child and let the other freeze. But Jakob had seen too much death already. His wife in childbirth, his neighbors in the winter of 1886, the stumps where his fingers used to be, and he could not add a 7-year-old boy to that list, could not walk away and hear that crying stop, could not be the man who chose his daughter's life by letting another child's life end. He got them both back to the sod house. It took forever. He carried Ingrid because she could not walk, dragged Niels by his coat, followed the rope hand over hand through the white nothing, and when he finally stumbled through the door and collapsed on the dirt floor with both children in his arms, he knew he had maybe an hour before the cold took them if he did not act fast. He stripped their wet clothes off, wrapped them in every blanket he owned, laid them by the fire, rubbed their hands and feet to bring back circulation, fed them warm broth spoonful by spoonful until they stopped shaking and their skin went from blue to white to pink. Ingrid recovered first. She could speak. She told him what had happened. The teacher had panicked when the dark wall hit. She had dismissed the children, told them to run home, thought they would make it if they hurried. Some did. Most did not. The children's blizzard would kill more than 200 people that day. More than 200 of them children, scattered across Dakota and Nebraska and Minnesota, frozen in the snow, within sight of their own front doors. Niels was still shivering. His teeth chattered. He kept asking for his mother, and Jakob Holstedt looked at this boy, this child he had saved from the cold, and realized that saving him once was not enough. The Anderson family would not know if their son was alive or dead. They would be sitting in their own farmhouse 2 miles south, praying, waiting, believing that Niels had frozen somewhere between school and home. They would not know until someone told them, and the storm was not over. The wind still howled. The temperature was still dropping. -30, -40, the kind of cold that killed in minutes. Think about this moment. Stop and think about it. Jakob Holstedt has both children safe. His daughter is alive. The other boy is warming by the fire. He could wait out the storm. He could keep them all inside until morning, until the blizzard passes, until it is safe to take Niels home. That is what the rules say. That is what every sensible man would do. But 2 miles away, the Anderson family does not know their son is alive, and the West has turned against Jakob, and the cold is waiting. And he knows that if he steps back out that door, he might not come back. What would you do? Would you risk everything to bring a neighbor's child home through a blizzard that has already killed hundreds? Or would you wait until morning and let that family spend the night believing their boy is dead? Tell me in the comments, because what happens next changes everything. And I need to know if you understand why a desperate father makes the choices he makes. Jakob wrapped Niels in a bearskin coat that had belonged to a trapper who froze to death the previous winter. The kind of coat that was almost warm enough for -40 degrees if you did not stay out too long. He told Ingrid to keep the fire high. He told her that if he was not back by morning, she should wait for neighbors, that she should not come looking for him, that she should stay inside no matter what. She begged him not to go. She was 8 years old and her mother was dead, and now her father was about to walk into a blizzard that had killed bigger men, stronger men, men who had not already lost fingers to the cold. But Jakob was a Swedish immigrant who had learned his English from farmers and his faith from the Lutheran Church. And he believed, in a way that was both simple and absolute, that God did not put a child in your hands so that you could let his parents think he was dead. He believed that there were things a man did not because they were smart or safe, but because they were right. And so he picked up Niels Anderson, wrapped him tight against his chest so the boy's face was sheltered from the wind, and he walked back out into the cold, using the rope to the barn as a starting point, heading south into the teeth of the blizzard, into the white nothing, into the West that had already turned against him and was waiting with frozen hands to finish what it had started. What happened in the next 4 hours, no one knows completely. Jakob never spoke of it in detail. He lost his way within minutes. The wind was too strong. The snow was too thick. He could not see his own hands. He stumbled. He fell. He got back up because he was carrying Niels. And if he did not get back up, the child would die. And a desperate father does not let a child die, not when there is still breath in his lungs and strength in his legs, even if that strength is fading with every step and the breath is coming harder. He found a windbreak by accident, a small coulee where the land dropped away and the wind passed overhead instead of tearing through, and he crawled down into it with Niels still wrapped against his chest, and he sat there in the darkness with his back against the frozen earth and his body curled around the child to keep the worst of the cold away. The storm raged. Hours passed. Jakob could feel his feet going numb, then his hands, then his face, the places where his fingers used to be hurt, which made no sense because you cannot hurt where there is nothing. But the cold did not care about sense. It took what it wanted, and what it wanted was everything. When the wind died, just a little, just enough to see maybe 20 feet instead of 2, Jakob forced himself to stand. Niels was still breathing, still warm, or warm enough, pressed against Jakob's chest under layers of wool and hide. They moved south, or what Jakob thought was south. It might have been east. It might have been west. The world was white, and the stars were gone, and the only thing that guided him was a sense, deep and wordless, that God does not bring a man this far through the cold just to let him die before he finishes what he started. He walked, he fell, he walked again, and then, through the snow, through the wind that was still howling though not as fierce as before, he saw a light, faint, flickering, a lamp in a window. The Anderson farm. He made it to the door. He knocked. He could not feel his hands enough to know if the knock made sound, but the door opened anyway, and Carl Anderson stood there with a rifle because men did not open doors, in the middle of a blizzard, without being ready to shoot. And then he saw Jakob, saw the bundle in his arms, saw his son's face looking out from under the bearskin, and Carl Anderson, a Norwegian farmer who had buried 2 children already and had spent this entire day believing he was about to bury a third, took his boy from Jakob's frozen arms and wept. Jakob did not stay. He said 2 words, Niels, safe, and then he turned and walked back into the blizzard, back north toward his own farm where his daughter was waiting, where the fire was still burning, where he needed to be before he could rest. He almost made it. He collapsed a quarter mile from his sod house, within sight of his own barn, if the visibility had been better, within shouting distance if his voice had not given out hours earlier. The cold took him down. Not dead, not yet, but close. Closer than any man should come and still survive. His body shut down. His mind floated somewhere above the snow, watching himself lying there. And he thought about Anna, his dead wife. And he thought about Ingrid, his living daughter. And he thought about Niels, the child he had saved. And he thought that if this was the price the West demanded for breaking its rules, then it was a price he could pay because the rules were wrong. And a desperate father who saved a child from the cold was worth more than any rule that said otherwise. Ingrid found him at dawn. She had waited as long as she could until the wind stopped and the snow settled and the sky started to lighten in the east. And then she had tied the rope around her waist and gone out to look for him. This 8-year-old girl walking through waist-deep drifts, calling for her father in a voice that cracked with cold and fear. She found him face down. She thought he was dead, but when she touched his shoulder, he made a sound, barely a sound, more like a sigh than anything, and she knew he was still alive, and she ran back to the house and stoked the fire high, and then she ran out again and grabbed him by the coat and dragged him, inch by inch, through the snow to the door, this child pulling her father home because he had gone out into the cold to save someone else's child. And now it was her turn to save him. Neighbors came later that day, when the storm finally broke and people could move again, when the sun came out over a landscape that looked like the moon, white and frozen and empty, except for the shapes that stuck up out of the drifts, some of them fence posts, and some of them cattle, and some of them people who had not been as lucky as Jacob. They carried him inside. They cut off his boots and saw that his feet were black from the toes to the ankle, frozen solid, dead tissue that would have to come off if he was going to live. They cut off his remaining gloves and saw that his other hand, the one that still had all its fingers, was frozen too, and those fingers would have to come off as well. The cold had taken its price. It always did. The West had turned against Jakob Holstedt the moment he stepped back out into the blizzard with another man's child, and it had marked him, crippled him, taken from him everything a farmer needs to work his land, and left him with stumps where his hands and feet used to be. But Niels Andersen was alive, Ingrid Holstedt was alive, and Jakob somehow was alive too. The community did not know what to make of him. Some said he was a hero, some said he was a fool. The Andersen family came to visit as soon as the roads were passable, and Carl Andersen said over and over that he owed Jakob a debt he could never repay, that Niels was alive because of him. But other neighbors, the ones who had lost children in the blizzard, looked at Jakob and saw a man who had broken the law of winter, the unspoken law that said you save your own first, and they did not know if that made him brave or reckless. Jakob never spoke of it. In the years that followed, as he learned to walk on wooden legs and do farm work with fingerless hands, as Ingrid grew up and married and moved away, Jakob Holstedt remained the quiet Swedish immigrant he had always been, a man who spoke broken English and kept his thoughts to himself and went to church every Sunday and never told the story of the night he saved Niels Andersen from the cold. Other people told it for him. The story spread. It became legend, growing with each telling, until the real Jakob disappeared beneath the myth of the desperate father who defied the blizzard. But Niels Andersen remembered. He grew up. He became a man. He farmed his own land, married, had children of his own, and every year on January 12th, he would visit Jakob wherever Jakob was, and he would sit with him in silence because there were no words for what had happened that night. No way to say thank you for giving me my life when the cost was your hands and your feet and your future. And Jakob, the desperate father who had saved a child from the cold when the West turned against him, would nod and pour coffee with his fingerless hands and ask about Niels's family, and they would sit there together. These two men who were bound by a blizzard that killed 235 people but did not kill them, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable because it was the silence of men who understand that some things cannot be spoken, that some choices cannot be explained, that some debts cannot be repaid. The West turned against Jakob Holstedt on January 12th, 18D8. It took his hands, it took his feet, it took his ability to farm, and left him dependent on charity and the generosity of neighbors for the rest of his life. The cold marked him in ways that never healed, in ways that made him a cautionary tale to some, and a hero to others, and a mystery to everyone who tried to understand why a desperate father would risk everything for a child who was not his own. But Jakob knew why. It was not complicated. It was not heroic. It was simply this: When you are a father and a child is dying in your arms and you have the power to save that child, you do not ask whose child it is. You do not calculate the odds. You do not weigh your own life against theirs and decide that yours is worth more. You simply act. You step into the cold. You carry the child through the storm. And if the West turns against you, if the cold takes its price, if you end up broken and crippled and walking on wooden legs for the rest of your days, then that is the price you pay, because a desperate father who saved a child from the cold is worth more than a whole man who let that child die. If this story reached into your chest and grabbed hold of something true, if the desperate choices of a father who risked everything when the cold closed in and the West turned its back spoke to the part of you that understands sacrifice, then like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in Jakob's place, because stories like this need to be heard, and there are more where this came from, and the fathers who walked through blizzards deserve to be remembered.